Welcome to Revolutionary Optimism. Issues like economic hardship, political violence, and the rise of authoritarianism have left many Americans feeling more despair than ever. Fortunately, physician, humanitarian, and social justice advocate Dr. Paul Zeitz has identified revolutionary optimism as a new cure for that hopelessness and cynicism. Once you commit yourself as a revolutionary optimist, you can bravely unleash your personal power, #unify with others, and accelerate action for repair, justice, and peace. On this podcast, Dr. Zeitz is working to provide you with perspectives from leaders on their strategies for overcoming adversity and driving forward revolutionary transformation with optimism. In this episode, Dr. Zeitz is talking with Danielle M. Reiff. Danielle M. Reiff is a professional peacebuilder, writer, and editor of her new book, Overcoming Information Chaos: A Guide to Building Peaceful Communities in the Digital Age. Her writing has appeared in Newsweek and other publications, and as a member of the U.S. Diplomatic Corps for 20 years, Danielle specialized in supporting democratic transitions and peacebuilding around the world. Recently, she founded the nonpartisan Peacebuilders Initiative to promote empathy, dialogue, and consultation, and other forms of nonviolence for advancing social change and political reform. Danielle is now organizing a national network of global democracy experts to renew U.S. democracy. She earned a graduate degree in international relations and peace from Sciences Po in Paris, France, as a member of the first ever cadre of Rotary Peace Fellows. In 2025, she earned an executive certificate in public leadership from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. She was a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Burkina Faso from 1998 to 2000, and she has been a Baha'i since 1997. Here's your host, Dr. Paul Zeitz.
Hey, Danielle. It's so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Hi, Paul. I'm fine. I'm excited that we're finally doing this. We've been talking about it for a few months while we waited for my book to come out. So here we are, and I'm glad.
Yeah, it's been an honor to work with you over the past year, and we've both been navigating the democracy renewal space. So look forward to talking about that. I appreciate our partnership and our dialogues and our learning and figuring out how to be in this interesting time. But I wanted to start off with something about you that really inspires me, which is that you are a tried and true, deep, soulful peace builder. And you've dedicated your life to being a peace builder. And I'd love for you to share a story from your family life or early life about where did this come from? How did you become so clear and so passionate about being a peace builder?
Early life. What happened in my early life that inspired me to become a peace builder? The reality is that when I was growing up, I didn't feel safe in my home. And I would spend a lot of time isolated in my room trying to stay safe. And I just had this very deep, deep longing to figure out, how do I create peace in my own life? How do I create peace in the world around me? When you don't have it, I think you're particularly um, keen to understand those things. And so you and I are both spiritual people, and I've come to believe that some of these deep inner longings that we have somehow manifest themselves in our lives over time.
Mm.
And so I went on, had the opportunity to do the Peace Corps, and then I studied peace studies, went on to become a U.S. diplomat where I worked on peace processes, reconciliation among warring groups and similar things. So I think it was just that deep longing when I was young to figure out how to bring peace to the world around me that still drives me. And, it's just become my life purpose and my real special interest, let's say.
Okay, great. That's amazing. Can you explain what you think of as peace building? Like, what are the key dimensions of peace building? And maybe tell us a story about, like, you were in the midst of some circumstance and this aspect of peace building became really vivid for you or clear or I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I've learned, and in my upcoming book, I actually outline a positive peace framework, what I think are the key elements of positive peace. The most important of which is, staying open, bridging our divides, building trusted community among diverse groups, diverse peoples, and really creating safety, being safe and creating safe spaces where anyone can feel a sense of belonging. So that's really the first piece of it. Of course, there are lots of bad actors that try to interrupt that or who have different values that are trying to, create communities around their values. And so, um, sort of blocking toxic influences is a key piece of peace building. And then eventually, of course, you need to build institutions that foster social cohesion and unity and diversity. Right now, our political institutions are very much built on a competitive mindset, whereas it's based in competition. And so the system itself is designed to pit us against each other. And ultimately, if we really want to live in a peaceful society, we have to codify the values of consultation and collaboration and unity in diversity in our political institutions. So those are the core pieces of it. There's a lot more, of course, but that's the essence.
Well, speaking of this opportunity to learn more, I just want to highlight your new book that's coming out called Overcoming Information Chaos. You are the editor of this entire piece of work, and you've also contributed several chapters. And so I wanted to ask you to share a story from Uganda when you were first out there doing peace building between different factions, if you will, of the Ugandan public, the Lord's Resistance Army and the children that were being abused by them, and then of course the government and all the stakeholders that you were involved with creating a what happened? How did you create a dialogue? How did you support a dialogue happening in that environment?
Yeah, so the when I arrived in Uganda in 2005, it was my first diplomatic assignment with the US Agency for International Development. I was working on democracy and peace building issues in general, and incidentally, right when I arrived, the International Criminal Court issued its first ever arrest warrant. So that's a young institution. It was the first time they'd ever issued any arrest warrants, and they issued the arrest warrants against the leaders of the Lord's Resistance Army that were terrorizing northern Uganda. And that unlocked some dynamics and shifted things. Eventually, it ended up that the Lord's Resistance Army and the government of Uganda entered into peace talks, but they were tough. They were tough peace talks. And, they really weren't seeing eye to eye. Things became stalled. And eventually, the mediator of the peace process invited the parties to go and do national consultations to help unlock, new thinking, new perspectives, new ways forward in the peace process. And so the government of Uganda peace negotiating team came to the US embassy and said, we could really use some help doing this. The mediator's only given us limited amount of time. Can you help us? And so I was invited to go be the US representative to help co-design and execute the national consultations with the government peace team. And it was really an extraordinarily inspiring situation. We had the way that USAID works is we generally contract out some of our work through international or global organizations. And we had brought one of those organizations in to help with the logistics and to help with the planning. And the leader of that organization said to me, we'll say we'll invite 100 people and let's plan that maybe 30 will come or 50. We know from our long experience that, you know, you invite people and not everybody comes. So let's use that as the metric for our logistical planning. And I said to him at the time, I said, I don't think this is like an ordinary convening. I don't think the same rules apply because this is an issue around which there is huge interest. Um, Everybody wants to be a part of the process. And lo and behold, when we went out and did the consultations, not only did people show up from far and wide and attendance far exceeded the invitation list, but there were organizations, non-governmental, local governments, all sorts of organizations that were organizing their own consultations to prepare for the official consultations with the government peace team when they showed up in town. And so there was just this incredible spirit of openness and willingness to engage in dialogue with people who hadn't really been involved in the process, people who weren't necessarily engaged in political processes more generally. A lot of people who'd been living in displaced persons camps for many, many years, victims of the Lord's Resistance Army. So it was just this incredibly inspired. The energy in Uganda during those weeks was really extraordinary. And it was, I think it was the energy that opened up the possibility for dialogue more than anything else.
Right, right. And I mean, you talked about your own personal longing for peace. And I think the story you just shared seems like an example of what we may believe, or actually you experienced it, a collective longing for peace.
Yes.
Obviously, it was a dire circumstance. There was conflict, there was violence happening, and that awakened this yearning to create and participate in a peace process through all these consultations. Wow.
Yeah, and I
God,
think
that is so inspiring. Yeah.
one of the takeaways and the lessons learned from that really is that when you give everyday people an opportunity to chime in, when you're willing to sit and listen to what they have to say, even about very complex political challenges, they can offer new perspectives and new solutions. And really, I have become a deep believer ever since then that, dialogue and broad consultation is really a critical approach to helping to overcome political divides and even conflict environments.
Yes. Well, that's a good segue. I want to spend some time now about your new book. And I want us to understand this, what you're trying to achieve by publishing this book called Overcoming Information Chaos. Now, one big takeaway for me, and I want you to tell me if I'm right or wrong, is that you talk about each of the authors actually of different sections have a personal story that they share about what is going on with information and information chaos and polarization, really, and separation, how the information ecosystem is separating us unnecessarily. And that
That's right.
is at an individual level. And you really talk about it collectively. And you help us navigate the ever evolving online space that's totally affecting the in person interactions. So, this is a rich, deep book with deep insights and deep perspectives on artificial intelligence and social media and how that's affecting the regular media and the polarization. It's a tour de force, and I really hope that people really take this on. It's a deep opportunity to really understand what is actually going on, so we can fix it. That's what I got.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear you got all that. My inspiration for writing the book was largely my family back home. I'm from rural Pennsylvania, very red place. My family, follows a lot of different social media outlets, some that I'm not following. And so sometimes we have very diverse understandings of what's happening in our country and diverse opinions about what's happening and what to do and what's best for our country. And there were times when I would see members of my family back home posting things that, for example, did not appear to be supported by clear data or evidence, like they didn't have sources, or I could see people falling into some biases, like biases that we all have. And I knew that it wasn't efficient and it wasn't effective to just run around and like comment for comment, respond to everything that people were posting. I thought, well, there has to be a better way. And I come from the international democracy assistance realm, and I personally know people who are doing pioneering research in media literacy and how do we tackle these issues? And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if I could tap into my own network, and the evidence and the research that I know exists, and
Mm,
somehow translate that and turn it into a format for everyday that makes it more accessible for everyday Americans. And so one of the reasons we share stories at the top of each chapter, it's twofold. One is I think it's just stories are more relatable. It's easier for people to understand concepts if you can talk about how they played out in your own life. But the other is just to say that everybody who wrote a chapter in the book has some level of expertise, and in some cases, like extraordinary expertise in their topic. And at the same time, we've all gotten caught up in information disorder at one time or another. Just because we happen to understand the research doesn't mean we're immune to how these
right.
things affect our lives. And so the stories are meant to demonstrate, like, even those of us who work in this field, we're human beings. We're all vulnerable to the disorder, to the biases, and we all collectively, individually and collectively, have to work on slowing down and being more savvy with information that we're encountering and with each other, really.
Yes, I think all of us probably feel overwhelmed by the volume of information flows, the schism between different perspectives. And I captured this line from the book where you said, "We now have sophisticated digital technologies that have depersonalized and exponentially intensified disagreements." That is
Yeah.
like really alarming if you think about the implications of that. Like all this digital world that is like taking over interaction of humans is actually intensifying disagreement. So we're seeing maybe a technology driven polarization that's actually dividing families, communities, and our country into different tribes. Can you explain what is information chaos? You said information disorder. So maybe you need to explain what is information disorder, information chaos versus where do you want us to get to? Like, what is where are we heading here with information order, I guess, or
Yeah, the opposite is
navigating information? I'm
information
not even sure.
integrity. Yeah, information integrity,
Okay.
information order, a culture of media literacy, if we can manage.
Mm,
Yeah, so in the first chapter, one of the things that I write about is how this is really an evolutionary moment for us as, the human species. That we've had propaganda, we've always had disinformation, we've always had conflict and war and all these things. These are not new by any means. But what is new is the incredible role that technology now plays in our lives and how it is accelerating and exacerbating some of the other those other things. And so the book really argues like this is an early moment in the digital age. We're being overwhelmed. We're allowing ourselves to be hoodwinked and divided by all these dynamics, but we can change that. We can change that. We can get savvier. We can slow down. We can be more intentional with the information we consume and share. And if we work together, we can create a culture of media literacy. And that starts in our own communities, in our own families. I mean, we just have to spread the principles and the practices of media literacy to reduce the negative impact that all this technology is having on our society. But you asked, what is information disorder? What is information chaos? So we define information disorder as the range of different ways that information is manipulated or that we encounter false or misleading information. So, for example, misinformation. This is not intentional. Like when you might have just heard something wrong and you share a piece of
sure.
information, but somehow it was incorrect.
Uh,
There's disinformation, which is intentional. This is what a lot of
Oh, okay.
politicians use. They intentionally share false information to try to further their own narrow political agendas. We talk about dangerous speech in the book, which is an important new evolution in the way we think about speech. So we've all heard of hate speech, but in the US and many places, we are such believers in free speech that it really is hard to identify like what expressions of speech are actually intended to cause harm or actually do cause harm. So in dangerous speech is a new term, and it's based on research. Basically, what is the language that research shows actually does lead to political violence, for example. So,
Mm,
dehumanizing
mm,
language. Like in
right.
Rwanda before the genocide, the radio stations were calling the minority group cockroaches. So
Mm,
that's an example of dehumanizing language. And once you've dehumanized a group of people and people have the impression that they're less than equal, less than human, then later on when the calls to violence come, when you're somehow, somebody encourages you to go commit violence against that group, it's somehow easier because you've already sort of come to the conclusion in your mind that they're not human anyway. And so
yeah.
so those are all kinds of different forms of information disorder.
Danielle, can you talk about how everyday citizens that are overwhelmed by the volume of news or paralyzed by the endless news cycle, how can we take steps to manage information chaos and be able to understand what's actually going on?
So important. So, if we individually and collectively are going to be more savvy with information, there are a few basic things, really mindset shifts that we need to make. One is that you make a difference in the information environment. So do I. And each one of us actually makes a difference. There's a concept, I don't know if you've seen it yet, that FIDE North America is coming out with about voice insecurity. This
Mm,
idea that some people, many people, don't believe that their voice actually matters or that it makes a difference. I know I've
mm,
spent most of my life in that mindset that, why bother saying anything, because what nobody's going to listen to me anyway. It's not worth speaking up. And so this is a barrier that we need to overcome, is helping people understand that yes, each one of our voices has power, and we all, if we use our voices to promote unity and peace, that we really can shift the culture. So that's one, like, believe that your voice matters and that what you do and say and the information you share online and does actually make a difference. The second thing is really just encouraging people to slow down and get into more of a thinking mindset before making conclusions or before sharing articles or posts, for example. Um, there's a natural instinct that we all have, and especially when we're in social media, we consume social media for entertainment for the most part. And yet, news is coming through, and so we might just, oh, this is funny, or oh, isn't that interesting, or might not even read it and just share because it sounds cool or sounds important. But by reacting too quickly and not thinking
Guilty,
carefully,
guilty.
yeah, we all are. We all are. How many times have you shared things without actually opening up the article and reading it? Um,
That's a
yeah,
really good tip.
yeah.
Don't share it unless you've read it.
That's right, that's right, and what we say in the book is, if you're in entertainment mode, you're relaxing, you don't wanna be bothered to read it, you don't wanna be bothered to check sources, that's okay. Just don't share it. Just don't share it.
Mm,
That's the key, that's the key. Um, so yeah, so slowing down so that we get out of our reactivity, out of amygdala
mm,
hijack, out of, like, fight or flight mode. Slow down, take a few deep breaths, especially when you encounter something that arouses your emotions, and try to get into your thinking brain and ask yourself a few basic questions like, where did this come from? Is it a credible source? Are the facts supported? And it's so quick and easy. Oftentimes, just one or two little Google searches will reveal, oh, every news outlet on the planet is reporting about this. It must be true. Or sometimes you Google it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, funny, nobody else is talking about this. Is it actually true? Or you look at something and you think it's current and you share it and you don't realize that it was actually from last year or 5
Mm.
years ago. So just looking at
Guilty.
the small details. Yeah, we all are. We all are. But these are the changes we need to make to clean up our information environment. And then two other important things, if I can add. One is that we have a natural instinct. One of our instincts as human beings is that if someone comes at us to correct us, oftentimes we double down. Like, who's that person to tell me I'm wrong? Well, you know what? I'm right, and now I believe twice as deeply that I'm right as I did before the person tried to correct me. So this is a natural instinct we have, and I think a lot of people online are just out there saying, "Oh, you're wrong, and that's wrong, and here's the correct information, and here." But that doesn't actually help. It doesn't actually help. Most people will only take correction uh, from people they know and trust. I mean, so really the level of trust that you have with a person is hugely influential in whether you're actually able to get them to open their mind to new perspectives or change their mind or change their behaviors. Like some stranger criticizing you on the internet is not likely to change someone's opinion. So correct the way you correct and who you correct is actually really important. And if you're going to do it, you have to do it in a way that's respectful, that allows people to save face, maybe even a private message. Like, just
Yeah.
just respect that, like, nobody likes to be embarrassed or corrected in front of a lot of people. And then, um, yeah, so that's called compassionate correction. And then on the flip side, if you find that you yourself have made a mistake, maybe you've shared something only to realize, oh, wait a minute, this was from last year. Oh, wait a minute, like I didn't look and there's actually no evidence to support this, and I shared it. It's important to admit your mistakes
Mhm.
publicly and post a correction. Let people know that you care about the integrity of the information you share, and that
Mm.
if you realize you're wrong, you will actually, post a correction or change your mind. We all have to learn how to just acknowledge that we're not perfect. We make mistakes. It's okay. It's okay. We're going to have to correct each other. We're going to have to correct ourselves if we're going to create a culture of media literacy.
Thank you for those very practical steps. Very, insightful and clarifying. And yeah, that is something I could take on. I'm going to commit to acting differently with the way I share information. I can slow down. I can make sure I read it. I can verify it's actually current and valid. And before I start pumping information out, sometimes I overdo it. And I think I appreciate you and I'm admitting it publicly. So I think I'm trying to model what you're teaching us right now. So thank you for that. Now, last question on the book. If you could briefly say, who do you want to read this book? You want the public to read it, students, academics? Who's your target for doing the deep dive into all these topics?
So the intention was to translate academic research for everyday Americans. The book
Okay, great.
ended up being, I think it's 15 chapters, so it's not a tiny book. But it's written in a way that's trying to convey really just practical knowledge, usable
Mm.
advice, things everyday people can use. And in the back there's some appendices to try to sort of summarize what are the key steps to media literacy, what are the biases that we're all vulnerable to, what is what is positive peace, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there's so much great information. I highly recommend it for folks. And I think this will help us get out of the ditch that we're in. and we're going to transition to that now. I don't want to predetermine what you're going to say, but I want, because you're a global democracy expert and you've been working for 20 years all over the world. I know in the last couple years, you've been working domestically in the United States, and I'd love to have you help us make sense of what's going on right now. I know you've been working with democracy experts, domestic and global experts, on trying to assess what is exactly going on here. Could you give us some updates about your perspective on what's happening with US democracy?
Yeah. So, like you said, I spent my career in the international democracy assistance field with global experts in democracy. And I want to distinguish that from being involved in partisan politics because, of course, the pollsters and the advisors and the candidates in political parties are also experts in democracy, but in a different way than I am or the people that I work with. So, we don't focus on the partisan framing in democracy. We're really sort of independent observers. So, for example, in every country I worked in, I would go in. We were invited by the government. I would go as the senior democracy expert, and I would work to assess what is the state of democracy in this country. And we at USAID had a framework called the Democracy Assessment and Strategy Framework that
Hmm.
basically looked at a democratic system, as an ecosystem, as a
Mm,
whole. Um,
mm,
and uh, that framework sort of breaks down the different components of a democratic system and asks key questions to help us understand like which pieces of the democratic system are failing or backsliding, which ones are actually performing well in alignment with core democratic principles. So we have taken this assessment framework and we've adapted it for the US, which has been fun. Nobody's ever done this exercise with the US before. And what we're realizing is that the level of breakdown in our entire democratic system in all its different component parts is quite significant. And so the breakdown is happening very quickly. There's a group called the Varieties of Democracy Institute out of Sweden. They were founded out of some research that was conducted in our international democracy field. We realized after the fall of the Berlin Wall and in the early 90s. So, we were at the end of history and liberal democracy had clearly won out over communism. And people thought, oh, well, democracy's won and that's it. And that's the way it's going to be from now on. And
mm,
so Varieties of Democracy and some other groups said about, okay, how do we understand that? How do we measure it? And so they tried to come up with objective measurement ways of measuring democracy. And so they do tremendous work, but based on their criteria, the founder of the Varieties of Democracy Institute believes that we are already in an electoral autocracy here in the US. And this is based on sort of rigorous criteria, so objective criteria
and global comparison.
and global
So our
comparison.
democratic system is breaking down.
Yeah.
And you said that we were in what kind of autocracy? An electoral autocracy?
An
What does that mean?
electoral autocracy, which basically means that we hold elections and the elections appear to be free and fair. Perhaps they are mostly free and fair, but the behaviors of the elected officials are more autocratic in nature and are diminishing the practice of democratic values, diminishing the democratic institutions and democratic values.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a big area of discussion by the public, as you know, and also recently, the New York Times published a whole 12-point assessment of whether or not we're in an authoritarian takeover. And there were other independent assessments from Dem Trends, Democracy Trends, and others that also are all showing that we're in an autocratic, authoritarian situation. So do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. Um, yes.
So, okay, so we're already in that situation. Then what do we do? Can you explain to us your understanding at a high level, not detailed, but like of like the movements out there, the four
Yeah.
B's framework, if you will? Like how is this evolving? What's the counter response that you're seeing in the wake of this authoritarian project?
I had a wonderful conversation just a few days ago with a forest scientist. And we were talking about the civic ecosystem, the democratic ecosystem in the US. And as I was talking, I was sharing an emerging framework that is becoming more well understood and well articulated within the civil society community in the US, which is bridge, build, block, and belong. That these are sort of the four main approaches that we need to cultivate in order to renew our democratic ecosystem. And as I was talking to my forest scientist friend, she said, "That's extraordinary, Danielle, because those are exactly the four steps that are involved in restoring a forest ecosystem when
Wow.
it is dying." Yeah, it was fascinating. It was fascinating. So, for example, belonging. So in the civic renewal community, we talk about building inclusive spaces at the local level where anyone is welcome to come and engage, whether it's just to get to know your neighbors again or whether it's to do joint service projects or any other thing, but we're trying to rebuild community at the local level, inclusive community at the local level. And she told me that in forests, one of the things that foresters do is they try to reconnect their fungal networks underneath
Mm,
the soil underground that help the trees share information and resources. So, like, just rebuilding that connectivity, so that's the parallel in the forest and in our civic ecosystem. In terms of blocking, so she talked about blocking aggressive, like apex predators or invasive species. If you want to
mm.
restore a forest ecosystem, you've got to block those, predators and invaders from bringing foreign influence in. And so in the civic ecosystem, when we talk about blocking, we're talking about blocking authoritarian initiatives or authoritarian
And that's really
overtures.
where I would put the resistance, like the street
Yes.
demonstrations, the judicial resistance, anything that's
Yes.
pushing back against. That's
Yes.
all in blocking zone, right? Is that
That's
right?
right. That's right. Exactly. So belonging, blocking. Then in the US, there's a whole bridging movement, which is about helping to bring divided groups together to encourage dialogue and to help us remember how to talk across our differences and get to know each other and be able to have civil discourse across our divides. And so, one of the prominent groups, of course, in that field is Braver Angels. They bring conservatives and liberals together in the US, teach debate, teach dialogue, and just, let people figure that out. So in the bridging and building diversity in a forest ecosystem, the more diverse species you have, the more stable the forest
Mm,
ecosystem is. So I thought that was interesting. So
mm.
building diversity and unity and diversity through the bridging movement. And then finally, building. And this is one I know that is near and dear to your heart as you work on constitutional reform issues. But building is really, earlier I said one of the stages of peace building is, once you sort of build the culture of peace, then at some point you have to codify it in your institutions. You have to reform your institutions so that that becomes the foundational framework
Mm.
for society. And so we're going to have to, if we want to live in peace and deeper democracy, we're going to eventually have to reform our institutions, reform our legal frameworks, to foster collaboration across divides and unity and diversity. So yeah. And so, yeah, there are these parallels with cultivating a forest ecosystem, and I just think that's fascinating. It's not about top-down change. It's about really just, cultivating connection and,
Hmm.
cultivating a new way of life in society.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the forest metaphor helps one, remember and make sense of the four B's in the context of our civic space. It's a good way to like remember how we can be as individuals and how that can change everything. But as you were saying, like there are large national movements operating across the country in all these areas, building, blocking, bridging, and belonging. And yet it you turn on the news, now we're back to the social media flow or the news cycle. All we're hearing is all about all the division and polarization. So it's kind of disjointed. So what gives you hope right now? And how do you see peace emerging in the face of this, all the possibilities that you see and all the realities of what we're facing?
So one of the dynamics of digitalization is that we have created a lot of news deserts at the local level. So
Hmm.
newspapers are going out of business, advertising is all going to Meta and other social media platforms. And so people no longer have a reliable source of information in many places about what's happening in their own communities. And so this is partly what's
Hmm.
driving this is people are now mostly watching like national news or even international news, and they're less connected to what's happening in their own community. So one of the things, so that's what you're talking about. When you turn on the news, it's all, polarized national stuff. And
Right.
yet, in communities across the country, there is a tremendous amount of community building happening. Just a tremendous amount, examples all over the place. And so, one of the things we have to do to change these dynamics is really just get out into our communities and talk to people for ourselves, and enter into dialogue, and remember that we're all just neighbors, we're fellow human beings. Most of us
Hmm.
get up in the morning and we're just trying to do the best we can for our families in our communities. Like very few people actually get up in the morning and want to hurt other people. um and so if we can get back into human connection with each other, it's easier to remember that. And I hear stories all the time about that happening. And so that gives me a lot of hope. Although, you talked about how does all this come together? Every movement is flourishing and doing great things, but I I do think we have some road to travel to bring all of these pro-democracy or pro-peace movements together. And I'll give an example. A friend of mine reached out to me the other day. She's in Montana. And she said, she's a peace builder. She and I studied together peace studies. And she said, I'm just a little discouraged because I look around and I see a lot of civil resistance. There are a lot of people in blocking mode. She said, and I want to build. I want to build inclusive communities. I want to do bridge building. She didn't use that language, but that's what she was talking about. She's like, I'm a peace builder. I want to do the constructive stuff, and I can't find it. I can't find it in Montana. And so the movements around bridging and building and building something new based around the values of media literacy and democracy and peace, it's not made it to the mainstream yet. And so this is the challenge we need to overcome is we need to figure out how can we get the bridge building movement to be more visible so that more people can find it and join in the movement. But this is the moment we're building. It takes time, and little by little I see progress just in the time that I've been working in the movement. So do you see
Yeah,
progress,
thank
Paul?
you for that. Yeah, I totally see progress. I feel like there is an awakening happening. And you talked about that longing that you had as a young girl and how you brought that into your whole professional life at scale in large difficult environments. And I think the groundwork for that is being laid here. The tracks are being laid here for that here in the United States. And your friend in Montana is a signal, right? That there's a demand, there's a yearning for that. And people are awakening, like in response to the crisis that we're in. So I am very hopeful. I do feel like we're on the cusp of something extraordinary. So thank you for your leadership in helping define and live into being a peace builder and awakening that peace building part in all of us and helping us navigate and overcome information chaos. Thanks, Danielle, for all your amazing work, and have a great week ahead.
It's been a pleasure, Paul. Thank you.
What a great episode with Danielle Reiff, the editor of this amazing book, Overcoming Information Chaos. She's the editor and author of several chapters. Danielle is a peace builder, true and true, from her soul into her full expression of every word and all of her work over decades. She's been a leading democracy expert around the world, helping to support peace building and transitions from authoritarian into peaceful regimes. And thankfully, she's been working on the US ecosystem for the last couple years. And her deep dive into this information chaos that's leading to polarization, she's offering us an understanding of that so that we can then move together and create a culture of peace and belonging and connection so that we can depolarize and live together and coexist together peacefully. What an extraordinary vision, and also practical tools for how to do it. So Danielle is undoubtedly a revolutionary optimist, and I'm honored to work with her and share in this journey together.
Are you ready to be part of the revolution? To learn more about revolutionary optimism, please visit revolutionaryoptimism.com. To get to know Dr. Zeitz, please visit drpaulzeitz.org. And to explore building movements, please visit unifymovements.org. If you like this show, be sure to follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Revolutionary Optimism, transforming the world one episode at a time.